So student engagement is this idea that students have a connection to their learning, and I think this is the most important thing about their experience at university, because that's what they've come to university for, is to learn. But we tend to think a lot when we talk about student engagement about just what they're doing, like whether they're coming to class and whether they're handing in their assignments. The definition of student engagement that I like to work with is multidimensional. So there are three dimensions or kinds of engagement, if you like: behavioural engagement, emotional engagement, and cognitive engagement. So behaviour, what they're doing, their participation, actually doing the work; emotional, their interest and their enjoyment and enthusiasm for the learning; and cognitive, their actual processing of the information. So I think it's really important to think about engagement that way. Why is engagement important is the next logical question here, because we know from the research that when a student's engaged, they learn better. And if they learn better, they get better grades, they get more successful, and they get the things that we want them to get from university. And if they're disengaged, if they're not able to engage with their learning, then you can get this downward kind of spiral effect where they become disillusioned, they're not satisfied with their experience here at university, and then that further disengages them. The third obvious question, so that's engagement and what are the outcomes of engagement, the third obvious question is, how do we change this thing? Because that's what we want to do. We want to engage our students, and we're always saying that. How do I engage my students? The thing about student engagement, and the framework really clarifies this, is that there is a multitude of variables, both from the students' backgrounds and experiences and the university context, that influence whether or not a student is engaged. And it's never just one thing, and it's never just about the student or just about the teacher or just about the university. It's always the kind of the interaction between them, the sort of interplay between all these variables. And what happened when I was doing my research, one of the things that I started to realise is that as well as student engagement, there were things about the student experience that are incredibly important, and we kind of know they're important, but I don't think we've really thought about why quite so much before. And at the time I was working with the idea of student belonging, which everyone talks about how important it is that our students feel like they belong here. But what I started to understand from my research and from the literature is that belonging is like a pathway to engagement. So when a student feels like they have an academic and social belonging in their classroom, for example, they're more open to being engaged. It's easier for them to be interested in what's happening, to actually be processing the information, because they feel comfortable, they feel happy in this space. And I realised from the literature that there were other, what I'm calling pathways to engagement, things about the student's response to their world that then either inhibit or foster engagement. And so there are four of these pathways. Belonging is one. Self-efficacy, the student's belief in whether they can do this thing has a real influence on whether they do it and how they feel about doing it. Their overall well-being, something that we're talking a lot about in universities at the moment, because we're recognising that our students have quite big issues with their well-being. And again, if a student's stressed, if things are going wrong in their life or in their classroom or with their friends or whatever, it's so much harder for them to want to or to be able to engage with their learning. So it matters, well-being. And the fourth one is students' emotions, which I could talk about a lot because it's so important and it's so not talked about. But again, certain emotions lead to engagement. Like a certain amount of anxiety is actually a good thing. So it's not as simple as bad emotions and good emotions. Some anxiety about an upcoming assessment makes you actually do the upcoming assessment. If you're not worrying about it, you're not going to get out there and do it. So, but at the same time, if you're feeling really frustrated by poor instructions or bad teaching or the fact that you, I don't know, couldn't get the textbook because you can't afford it, those kinds of things, those kinds of negative emotions have the opposite effect. They inhibit engagement and they make it harder for the students. So that's kind of the framework in the whole. You've got engagement itself, the four pathways to engagement, and everything that we do and everything that the student brings with them interacting to influence whether they engage or not.